When my daughter got married, I kept quiet about the $33 million I inherited from my late husband. I remember the way the air clung to my skin that morning, hot, heavy, and full of unsaid things. Charleston summers are like that, beautiful and unbearable at the same time. My name is Evelyn Mercer, and on the day of my daughter Lily's wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, holding a string of pearls that had belonged to my husband's grandmother. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from the weight of a decision I had been carrying in silence for over 2 years. You see, after my husband Henry passed, I discovered something he had kept from me for decades, a secret that felt too large to say out loud. $33 million tucked away in trusts, offshore accounts, investments layered like nesting dolls. He'd left everything to me. No one knew. Not my friends, not my sister, not even Lily. Especially not Lily. And now, on the morning of her wedding, surrounded by white roses, rented joy, and the smell of champagne before noon, I stood frozen, wondering if I should finally speak the truth. I didn't. Not yet. Not because I was afraid of money. I was afraid of what it did to people. I'd seen it rot friendships, unravel marriages, turn children into strangers. Henry knew it too. That's why he kept it hidden. Why his final letter said, "Use it when the time is right." You'll know. I didn't know if today was that day. I only knew I was supposed to smile. So I put on the pearls, fixed my hair, and stepped into the Charleston heat, into the role I'd rehearsed for months, grieving widow, proud mother, background character. They sat me at table 12, of course, behind the largest floral arrangement I'd ever seen. I joked to myself that it could hide a small SUV. Symbolic, maybe. I was being decorated out of the way. But I didn't mind, because I'd already decided that this wasn't the time to make noise. This was Lily's day, and I'd play my part perfectly. Even if just across the room, someone I didn't trust was watching me with the smile far too confident to be genuine. I was halfway through a lukewarm flute of champagne when I saw him, the man who now carried my daughter's last name like a badge he hadn't yet earned. Daniel Whitaker, 33, impeccably dressed, handsome in a catalog sort of way. The kind of man who knows which fork to use at a gala, but forgets to open the door for someone carrying groceries. He moved through the reception like he'd choreographed it himself, arm around Lily, nodding to important guests, sharing the same rehearsed laugh over and over again, a performance, elegant and hollow. He glanced my way. That's when it happened. He smiled. Not a warm, grateful smile, not the kind you offer your wife's mother when she's sitting alone behind a hibiscus wall. No, this smile was calculated, tense at the edges. It was the smile of someone evaluating an opponent, and I knew that smile. I had seen it in Henry's boardroom during mergers. I had seen it in trust fund lawsuits and estate challenges. I had seen it in men who asked about my future plans 5 minutes after Henry's funeral. This wasn't just a man who married my daughter. This was a man taking inventory. He walked toward me, champagne glass in hand, charm turned up like a switch. The room buzzed with small talk and string music, but for a moment, all I could hear was the soft crunch of his shoes on the tile as he approached. He called me Mrs. Mercer with practiced warmth and said how happy he was to finally get to know me better. He complimented the flowers, the ceremony, the food, all standard social choreography. But I'd danced this waltz before.
His words were polished. His gaze, however, flicked just a second too long toward my wedding ring, the one I still wore, and then toward my necklace, and then to the handbag I kept tucked beneath my chair. He was calculating. I gave him exactly what he expected: a soft laugh, a motherly nod, the harmless old widow in pearls and gray silk. I said nothing about Henry, nothing about the money, nothing about the fact that I'd already had his name checked. And I knew what I was going to do next. I would let him underestimate me. I would let him walk away thinking I was irrelevant, because that was the best cover a woman like me could ever ask for.
After the reception, I returned home long after the last glass had been clinked and the final dance spun. My shoes were off before I even reached the stairs. My back ached, not from the day, but from the strain of keeping secrets under good posture. I slipped into Henry's study, the one room I had left untouched since his death. Still smelled like him, cedarwood and aftershave. His leather armchair faced the fireplace, and the bookshelf stood like a memory I couldn't dust off. I reached into the drawer of his desk for nothing in particular, just habit, perhaps. That's when I saw it again, the envelope with my name, written in his familiar, sharp script. I had read that letter before, twice, once in tears, once in silence. But that night, I read it again, not for answers, for reinforcement. Henry had written it a year before he passed, hidden it where he knew I'd eventually find it. In the letter, he laid it all bare. Evelyn, I kept the truth from you, not out of mistrust, but protection. We are not poor. We haven't been for decades. I invested quietly because I saw too many men die and leave behind chaos. I couldn't do that to you. The money, all $33 million of it, is structured to land softly in your hands, but only if you remain alert. Because, Evelyn, someone will come. Maybe not right away, but someone always does. Someone always does. His words burned through the page like they'd been branded on it. And now, sitting in that room in my bare feet with flower petals still clinging to my skirt, I realized what he meant. Daniel. Too charming, too quick, too polished. The way he looked at me at the wedding, not with affection, not with curiosity, but with calculation. Henry had warned me, and now the clock had started ticking. I wasn't afraid, not yet, but I wasn't foolish either. So I opened the hidden compartment in Henry's desk, the one even Lily didn't know existed, and pulled out the binder I'd promised myself I'd never need. Inside was the network, lawyers, bank contacts, a woman named Carol Peterson, Henry's quiet guardian, as he called her, a former prosecutor turned elder asset defender. She hadn't called me in 2 years, but I knew she'd pick up if I called first. And something in my bones told me I'd be calling her very, very soon. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made tea and sat in the living room with the lamp on low, Henry's letter on the table beside me, and my phone resting in my palm like it was heavier than it should have been. At 7:58 a.m., I dialed the number. She answered on the first ring. Carol Peterson's voice was exactly as I remembered it. Calm, clipped, no room for nonsense. She didn't ask how I'd been. She said, "Evelyn, is it time?" "Yes," I said simply. "It's time." By noon, she was on my front porch, tall, silver-haired, wearing a slate gray blazer and walking like a woman who didn't need permission to enter any room. She hugged me briefly, then opened her folder before I'd even offered tea. We got right to it. I told her everything. Daniel's smooth act, the long glances, the sudden warmth, the small talk that felt too strategic. I didn't have proof. I didn't need it. I had instinct and Henry's warning. Carol listened, scribbled notes, and nodded. Then she pulled out a manila envelope. Inside, Daniel Whitaker's financial footprint. He was clean, but too clean. No debts, no loans, no major assets in his name. It was like he'd erased his past and started fresh just before meeting Lily. There were LLCs registered to third parties in Delaware, trusts built for family planning, a name he'd used 3 years ago, Jonathan D. Winters. Fake. All of it. He'd done this before. Different woman, different city, same pattern. Lily didn't know. She thought she'd married a man with ambition, charm, and good credit. She didn't know she'd married someone with an offshore reputation for slowly rewriting a widow's life, one document at a time. And now, he had his sights on me. Carol closed the folder with a snap. "I can prepare the defenses," she said. "We can freeze movement on your trust, add legal barricades, prepare a statement of capacity from your doctor, record a private testament, and begin digital surveillance. But Evelyn," I looked up. "If he's good," she said, "he'll make you trust him first." That was the moment I felt the first true tremor of fear. Because I'd seen that smile. And part of me, the mother in me, wanted to believe it was real. But the woman Henry married knew better. So I told Carol the truth. I wasn't afraid of Daniel. I was afraid that Lily would defend him before she believed me, and that made everything exponentially more dangerous. There's a test I learned from my own mother, long before trust funds and digital trails became part of my life. We called it the casserole test. You make a meal, you serve it with kindness, then you watch. Not what they say, what they do. It's how we spotted liars, charmers, and future ex-husbands all over a simple dish baked with just enough love to disarm. That Sunday, I invited Daniel and Lily for dinner. I told them I'd made Henry's favorite, a chicken and rice casserole with rosemary and caramelized onions. The moment Daniel walked in, he scanned the kitchen. Not like a guest, like a man memorizing the floor plan. His eyes lingered on my watch, then on the mail tray, then the bookshelf where I kept family photos and a discreet binder marked estate notes. Strike one. He complimented the casserole, of course, said it smelled just like something his grandmother used to make. But when I asked him what herb I thought I used, he froze. Strike two. The casserole test wasn't about food. It was about observation, tension, focus. People who genuinely care eat slowly. They listen. They chew. They ask questions that matter. Daniel, he inhaled it, fork to mouth like he had somewhere more important to be. He talked more than he listened, mentioned how Lily was lucky to have inherited her mother's charm, then casually steered the conversation toward retirement, home ownership, and asset consolidation. Not once did he ask how I was holding up. Not once did he mention Henry's name with any real weight. But the third strike, the one that sealed it for me, came as he stood to help clear the dishes. He reached for the estate binder, a little too casually, a little too curious. I watched him. I said nothing, because that was the moment I knew. He was hunting. This wasn't love, it was strategy. I smiled as he handed me the dishes, told him the rosemary was from my own garden, and as he chuckled and kissed Lily on the cheek, I silently marked the evening in my mind. The test had worked. Daniel had failed. And now it was my turn to prepare something much more dangerous than casserole. The night after the casserole test, I sat on my back porch, sipping cold tea I'd forgotten to drink. The air in Charleston was heavy, thick with magnolia and something I couldn't quite name. Maybe dread. Lily had looked radiant that night, laughing, leaning into Daniel like a woman in the early pages of a romance novel. She had no idea that I had just confirmed what Henry warned me about.
Daniel wasn't a husband. He was a threat with good hair. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to shake her and scream, "He's not who you think he is. He's been lying since day one. Look at the records. Look at the names he's used." But how do you tell your daughter that the man she loves, the man she just promised forever to, is a fraud in designer shoes? I knew what would happen. She'd defend him. She'd call me paranoid. She'd say I was still grieving or jealous of their happiness. Maybe she'd even say I needed help. That's how it goes. Truth feels like betrayal when it attacks the fantasy you've built your life around. So I did what I had done for years. I stayed quiet. But I started preparing for war. Carol helped me reinforce the trust protections. We locked down the funds so tight, not even air could pass through. She prepared statements, affidavits, and powers of attorney that could only activate with my explicit signature. Notarized, witnessed, triple confirmed. We installed cameras. We encrypted emails. We built a legal fortress out of every dollar Henry had left behind. But still, my heart ached for Lily. She was the softest part of my life. The joy I had raised with lullabies and lunchbox notes. The baby who once called me her best friend and now texted once a week because married life is busy. What she didn't know was that her mother wasn't slipping. Her mother was sharpening. Because I wasn't just protecting money anymore. I was protecting her, even if it meant losing her in the process. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance Henry had left me. Not the money, the will to protect, even when it hurt. It didn't take long after the casserole night for Daniel to make his first move. He showed up on my porch the following Thursday. No Lily, just him. Suit jacket slung over his arm, sleeves rolled, smile turned to its highest setting. He carried a bottle of wine and the easy arrogance of a man who thought he was walking into checkmate. He said he just happened to be in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off something he thought I'd enjoy, something Henry would have appreciated. That's when I knew he was ready to start playing dirty. I let him in. He complimented the decor like it was the first time he'd noticed I had taste. Then he sat across from me, too relaxed, the bottle unopened. His eyes wandered, not toward the garden or the photo of Lily on her 5th birthday, but to the filing cabinet near my desk. Subtle. He made small talk about how Lily was glowing lately, how marriage had given her purpose. He mentioned how complicated it must be to manage things alone. Then finally he asked if I'd ever considered simplifying some of the more complex assets. And there it was, the gentlest beginning of a financial seduction. I smiled and played my part. I told him in a voice as smooth as southern syrup that my life was full of little complications, and I rather liked them that way. But inside, my blood ran cold. Because I'd seen this maneuver before, in men who thought my pearls meant I was soft, or that my quiet meant I was uninformed. They mistook my calm for weakness. What Daniel didn't know was that the moment he walked through my door, he had triggered a silent countdown. Carol had already coached me, the cameras were rolling, my estate lawyer was on standby, and every word he spoke was being logged, recorded, preserved. He thought he was gently coaxing a fragile woman towards surrender. He didn't realize I was already gathering ammunition. So when he stood to leave, thanking me for the conversation, placing the bottle on the counter like a peace offering, I thanked him too. Then I watched him walk to his car, pull out his phone, and immediately make a call. Not to Lily, to someone else. He spoke quickly, glanced back at the house once. I didn't need to know what he said.
I already knew his next move, and I was already planning mine. Some people call the police when they feel threatened. I've learned to start higher. That same evening, after Daniel had left with his eyes full of calculation and my front door closed behind him, I sat at Henry's old desk and opened the file marked Contingency Level 3. Inside was a card, plain, cream-colored, no fancy fonts, just Agent Sarah Torres, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Elder Fraud Division, Southeast Region. Henry had met her during a charity event years ago. They'd stayed in contact when he began planning our hidden financial protection web. If someone ever makes a move, call her before you call your lawyer, he'd told me once. I now understood what he meant. I called. Agent Torres answered on the second ring. I introduced myself and told her my name, my late husband's name, and the reason I was calling. She didn't ask for proof. She said, "I've been waiting to hear from you." That's when I realized Henry hadn't just set up protections. He'd built a net with names, faces, people who owed him favors and respected his foresight. Torres asked questions, sharp ones, about Daniel, his employment history, his aliases. Then she told me something that turned my stomach. Daniel Whitaker, or rather, Jonathan D. Winters, as he was known in Nevada, was already on a low-level watch list for suspected financial coercion in 2 previous cases involving women over 60. But those cases had fizzled out. No recordings, no hard proof. Only suspicion, shattered families, and voluntary transfers of assets. I was about to change that. I told her I had video, audio, a legal trust too solid to breach, and a daughter married to a man who was already plotting his way into my will. Torres didn't hesitate. She said she'd dispatch a digital forensics contact that week. They'd begin discreet background surveillance immediately. No arrest, not yet, but everything would be documented. We don't just want Daniel, we want everyone connected to him. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about one predator. This was about a network. People like Daniel, people who had figured out how to smile their way into estates, manipulate wills, and vanish before anyone thought to question their motives. And I wasn't just a target anymore. I was bait with a camera crew. That night, I poured a glass of Henry's favorite scotch and sat on the porch with the stars hanging low. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. I felt armed, and I silently thanked the man who had loved me enough to prepare me for a war I never asked for. 2 days after I called the FBI, Daniel called me. His voice was warm, too warm. The kind of warmth that doesn't heat anything, just coats everything with sticky intentions. He said he wanted to spend more quality time together, that it was important to him that we bond as family, and then he suggested dinner. Just the 2 of us. I could hear the smile through the phone. I paused, let the silence breathe, then agreed, cheerfully. I offered Thursday, 6:30, my place. He accepted, almost too eagerly. And with that, I set the table, not just for dinner, but for exposure. That afternoon, Carol stopped by. We wired the room, sound, video, motion. Torres's forensics team had prepped everything. I even baked Henry's favorite apple tart, because nothing says harmless widow like homemade dessert and linen napkins. By the time Daniel rang the bell, the trap was already humming with quiet electricity. He walked in holding a single bottle of wine and a bouquet of lilies. The irony of that gesture nearly made me laugh. He was relaxed, charming, talked about his childhood, his career plans, his desire to help Lily's family manage their affairs more efficiently. Then came the ask. He casually mentioned a lawyer friend who specialized in elder asset protection, said he'd drafted a few documents for me, just to look at, no pressure. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thin folder. I didn't open it, not right away. Instead, I smiled like someone too polite to interrupt. He talked about how these papers would allow Lily and him to act on my behalf if anything ever happened. Said it was the kind of thing all loving families do, that it would make things easier. I finally opened the folder. Power of attorney, medical directive, financial access, all of it. Signed by him, unsigned by me. He asked if I had a pen. I told him I'd think about it. And he, like every fraudster in a too nice suit, masked his panic with patience. "Of course," he said, sipping wine. "Take your time." But his hand was trembling, and I saw it, because now it was his turn to wonder who he was really sitting across from. I left the folder open on the dining table long after Daniel had gone. His handwriting on the sticky note, "We'll fill this out when you're ready," stared back at me like an insult wrapped in a smile. He had no idea how close he'd come to disaster. The documents were airtight, legally engineered. His lawyer, no doubt, had done this dozens of times, sliding power and control across the table under the disguise of helping. But he'd miscalculated two things. First, that I was alone. Second, that I was naive. He didn't know the pen I almost picked up was a prop for the camera. He didn't see the silent nod I gave before he arrived, signaling to Carol and Agent Torres hidden in the guest room with a live feed. He didn't hear the whisper in my head, Henry's voice, reminding me, "It's not just about what they say, Evelyn. It's about what they're counting on you to miss." And what Daniel missed was this. The moment he opened that folder in my house, he stepped into federal jurisdiction. The moment he asked for control, he became a case study. I had everything now: intent, documentation, pattern of behavior, precedent. The only thing missing was my signature, which of course he was never going to get. That night, I took the documents, slid them into a secure evidence envelope, and handed them to Agent Torres with a shaking hand and a steady heart. She smiled at me, a real one this time. "You've done the hard part," she said. "Now let us do ours." But I knew better. The hard part wasn't over. The hard part would be telling Lily, because the war was already won. But the next battle, the one for my daughter's heart, was just beginning. Telling Lily felt harder than losing Henry, because Henry had died with love in his eyes, and I feared Lily would look at me with betrayal. That Sunday, I invited her to brunch. Just us. No Daniel. No cameras, no traps. Just fresh biscuits, strawberry jam, and the kind of silence that mothers save for heartbreak. She sat across from me in the same chair where she once colored Easter eggs and read college acceptance letters. Her wedding rings sparkled, her smile was bright, and my heart felt like it was splitting in two. I waited until we'd finished our tea, until her phone buzzed twice and she silenced it. Then I said her name. Just once, softly, and I began. I told her I loved her more than breath, that nothing in this world meant more to me than her safety, her joy, her future. Then I told her what Daniel had done, how he had arrived in her life with a past he'd buried, how he'd charmed her and me with purpose, how he'd attempted to take legal control of my life and legacy under the false banner of concern. I told her about the aliases, the past victims, the offshore accounts. I told her about the FBI, about the dinner, about the documents.
At first, she didn't say anything, just stared at her plate. Her hand clenched the napkin in her lap until it wrinkled like paper soaked in grief. She asked how long I'd known. I told her weeks. She asked why I hadn't told her sooner. I said because I needed proof and because I was afraid. Afraid she'd pick him over me. And then her voice cracked. She whispered that she didn't know what to believe, that she loved him, that she'd built a life with him. I nodded, because I knew. I had done the same once with someone who wore charm like armor. But I also knew this. Love that's built on lies can't carry the weight of truth. And so I told her, with everything I had left, that I wasn't asking her to stop loving him. I was asking her to look at the evidence, at the patterns, at her own intuition. If after that you still choose him, I told her, I will still love you, but you'll be choosing him with open eyes. She didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. And something else, clarity.
The next morning, Lily didn't call, nor did she text. By afternoon, I had convinced myself she'd gone straight to Daniel, that she'd chosen comfort over truth, fantasy over fact. I had rehearsed my acceptance speech in my head, the one where I'd told myself a mother's love doesn't demand loyalty, only presence. But at 6:12 p.m., I heard the knock. It wasn't timid, it wasn't angry, it was steady. Lily stood at my door, no makeup, no earrings. She looked like the girl who used to crawl into bed with me after thunderstorms. Her face was puffy, like she'd cried until her body gave up. She didn't ask to come in, she just walked past me, into the living room, and stood in front of the mantel, where Henry's photo rested in silence. And then, without turning around, she said, I went to the hotel. She told me she'd confronted Daniel. She'd asked questions. Not the kind you ask when you want to believe, the kind you ask when you already know. And Daniel, with all his polish, all his charm, had faltered. He got angry, then defensive, then quiet. He asked if she had talked to me. He asked if I was confusing her. And finally, he asked if she really wanted to throw everything away over some paperwork. That's when she knew. Because real love doesn't negotiate truth like a sales contract. It doesn't deflect, it doesn't blame. It stands still and owns its shadow. And Daniel couldn't do that. Lily told him to leave. She said she'd call when she was ready, but she didn't know if that day would ever come. Then she came to me. She collapsed into my arms, shaking, and all the walls I'd built around myself came crashing down. Because for the first time in weeks, we were no longer on opposite sides of the truth. We were mother and daughter again, and we were ready to fight. Together. The next morning, the air felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but charged, like the sky before a summer storm. Lily stayed the night in her old bedroom, wrapped in the same quilt her grandmother had made 30 years ago. I heard her crying in intervals, not the kind of weeping that asks for comfort, but the quiet, cracking kind that says everything has changed and nothing will ever be the same again. By dawn, she was silent. And by 10 a.m., she was by my side at the attorney's office, handing over the final pieces of the puzzle. The video, the audio, the documents, the timeline, her statement. Agent Torres didn't blink. She said, "This is enough for a federal arrest warrant." I thought it would take days, maybe weeks, but it happened that same afternoon. Daniel had booked a dinner reservation in downtown Charleston, likely to charm someone else, maybe build his next opportunity. He never made it to the table. Federal agents in plain clothes stopped him outside the valet stand. They asked him to come quietly. He didn't. They cuffed him. It made the evening news. No mugshot, not yet, but enough information for the town to buzz. Local businessman arrested in multi-state elder fraud investigation. Lily saw it first on Twitter. Her hands trembled when she showed me. Her voice cracked when she said, "That's him." And I knew what it cost her to say that. She wasn't just watching her husband fall, she was watching the life she thought she'd built turn to ash. But ash, I told her gently, makes good soil. That night, we sat in silence on the back porch. Same chairs, same stars, but everything between us was different now. Stronger. And somewhere downtown, a man who thought he'd play us both was learning the hardest lesson of all. You don't hunt women like us, because we remember, and we prepare, and we bite back. The courthouse smelled like marble and cold coffee, but for me, it smelled like closure. The trial began 3 months after Daniel's arrest. He had pleaded not guilty. Of course he had. Men like Daniel always believe in one more performance, one more pitch, one more lie. But this time, he wasn't standing in a living room, he was standing in front of a jury. Lily testified on the second day. She wore a navy suit. No makeup, no tears. Her voice shook on the first sentence, but then she found her spine. She told them everything, from how they met to how she found out, how he'd infiltrated her family, how he tried to erase her mother with paperwork. Her testimony was like a slow earthquake, quiet, but devastating. Then came my turn. I stood before 12 strangers and told the truth with nothing but a file folder, a recording, and a heart that had been cracked open and put back together. I told them about the dinners, the smiles, the gentle coercion disguised as concern. I told them about Henry's foresight, the FBI's patience, and my decision to stop being afraid. When I was done, even the judge had gone still, and when the defense tried to argue I was confused, misled, emotional, I didn't blink. Because emotional doesn't mean irrational, and confused doesn't mean weak, and my memory was clearer than ever. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted financial coercion, forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to exploit a vulnerable adult. The sentence? 18 years in federal prison, no parole for the first 12. He stared at me as they let him away. No more smirk, no more charm. Just a man who'd realized too late that he'd tried to rob the wrong widow and had lost everything. But for me, it wasn't revenge. It was the beginning. Because something else had started in that courtroom, something that would grow larger than Daniel could ever imagine. And I was about to dedicate my wealth, my name, and my time to it. After the trial, everyone kept asking me one question. So, what now? What do you do when the man who tried to erase you is behind bars? When the storm has passed and the world expects you to go back to being small? I didn't. Because I couldn't. Henry hadn't just left me wealth. He'd left me a mission. $33 million not to spend, but to protect. Not to hoard, but to arm the next woman like me. So I built something. With Agent Torres, with Carol, with Lily by my side, we created a foundation. A legal and financial war chest. A permanent structure with one goal. To fight elder fraud and exploitation with the full weight of federal muscle and private funding. We called it the Mercer Initiative. Not named for me, but for what mercy really means. Not just compassion, but protection. We trained prosecutors.
We equipped families. We offered legal aid. We created anonymous reporting networks. And within the first year, we had helped uncover 9 active fraud networks, saved $12 million in assets, and stopped more than 40 predators before they could steal another signature. Lily became the public face of the campaign, and I, the woman once hidden behind floral centerpieces, became something else entirely. I became the name predators whispered about. Careful, she's another Evelyn Mercer. Henry would have been proud, not just of the victory, but of what came after. Because some people spend a lifetime building wealth, and others, they spend it building justice.
If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. And if you or someone you love is being targeted, remember this. You are not alone. You are not helpless. And your silence is not the same as your surrender. Drop a comment. Subscribe for more true stories. And if you've ever been underestimated, know this. Some widows don't just survive. We strike back.